Уважаемые коллеги, добрый день. Меня зовут Илья Воскобойников.
Dear colleagues, my name is Ilya Voskoboynikov, and today I will be the moderator of this session while we're waiting for our moderator. So today we have quite an extensive list and agenda. We'll have 4 speeches today, and I would like to speak a little bit about the organizational issues. The presenters will have 15 minutes, and we'll have a Q&A session in between the reports, 5 minutes. So we have Andrei Tatarinov and myself, who will be giving comments on the reports during the session. And we'll have a Q&A session also afterwards, after the 4th report. So I would like to ask our presenters today to stick to the timing, and considering our difficult conditions, please, it will be difficult for me to tell you that your time is over, so please stick to the timing. The first report will be presented by Anna Tsvetkova from the Bank of Russia.
Firm level evidence. Анна, вам слово.
Good evening, dear colleagues. Shall I start?
Yes.
Does everybody see my presentation?
I can see it. Thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would like to present my joint study with my colleague from Bank of Russia, Evgenia Bessonova, about productivity trends in Russian industries from level evidence. And the usual disclaimer applies. The views expressed in this presentation are solely those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official position of the Bank of Russia. The studies on firm level data is becoming more popular in recent years because of the availability of the firm level data. And almost in all studies concerning the level of productivity and its growth, the authors conclude that the productivity laggards grow faster than productivity leaders. And they argue that this is the argument for productivity convergence. However, despite this fast growth of productivity laggards, the productivity gap between the frontier and the rest establishments remain wide and increases over time. Here we can see the example of OECD countries, and as for Russia, we also show that this is true in Russia, but the feature is that the frontier is not so fast growing as in OECD countries, but the gap is increasing because of the rest establishment demonstrate a productivity decline. We verify our results about the increasing gap between the productivity frontier and the rest establishments using tools of stochastic frontier models. Our sample comes from Ruslana database and includes data on 2011-2016 years, includes revenue, fixed assets, number of employees, cost of sales, labor costs, and date of incorporation. We calculate value added as revenue minus cost of sales plus labor costs. And we calculate labor productivity as value added divided by number of employees. We focus our analysis on non-farm, financial, non-public sectors, and exclude firms with a number of employees less than 10 from our analysis. As a result, our unbalanced panel is made up of between about 35,000 firms in 2011 to 75,000 firms in 2016. On average, our sample includes 25% of employees in our selected sectors, and the distribution of employment across these selected sectors is close to Rostat. We divide our sample into narrowly defined industries, 173, on average at 3 or 4 level of ACVED. We define productivity frontier and estimate stochastic frontier models within these narrowly defined industries. Following the literature, we estimate beta convergence regressions, where the independent variable is labor productivity growth, while the dependent variable is the gap to the frontier in the previous year. We define frontier as the average productivity of the 5% of the most productive firms within each narrowly defined industry. We also include some controls such as size dummies, years, and sector dummies, and years. And we find that as almost in all studies concerning this issue, we find that the correlation between the gap to the frontier in previous year and labor productivity growth is positive. And this result is very robust. We can see it in all years and in all sectors. And also we check this result replacing labor productivity with multi-factor productivity. And we also find that the correlation between gap to the frontier in previous year and the labor productivity growth is positive. That is the argument for beta convergence. We'll find that our beta convergence rates are less than those presented in the literature. Here we can see the example for France, and our estimates is not so close to the 10% convergence rate, but is closer to a famous 2% convergence rate, which is close to the convergence rates between countries and not between firms within one country with well-established market economy. We find that the reason for that is that the convergence rate is dramatically declining with firms' age. And as firms age, the years needed to reach the half of the frontier is increasing. The reason for that is that entrants, young firms, are less productive than incumbent. As they start their business, they start to utilize their capacity and they converge to the incumbents. But after the year or maybe maximum 2 years, they stop and start to fluctuate at the average productivity of incumbents. The share of these fast-growing firms among young firms is very large, among about 78%. But the share of young firms among all firms in our sample is not very substantial. There are a lot of old firms with even declining productivity. As a result, the negative contribution of these old firms is prevalent, and the catching up impulse of extremely young new firms is not enough for all firms to converge to the frontier. This is one of the reasons because we can find this increasing gap between the rest of the establishments and the frontier despite the bigger convergence. And the second reason why these two facts are found simultaneously is the beta convergence features as survival bias and permutation sensitivity. In order to make this analysis, only those firms which are present in the sample for 2 consecutive years are included into the sample. So we do not pay any attention on firms which exit the market. And as from the point of view of beta convergence, permutation is also convergence. That means that if firms switch their places along the productivity distribution, from the point of view of beta convergence, this is convergence, but the gap between the frontier and the rest of establishment may stay the same. And we verify our results that we find increasing gap between the productivity frontier and the rest establishments by means of stochastic frontier models. We assume that not all establishments are efficient and some operates below the production frontier. For each narrowly defined industries, we estimate production function using translog specification, and for inefficiency term, we adopt time-varying decay specification. This specification incorporates gamma parameter, which show the convergence rate of firms within these narrowly defined industries. That's why estimation of this type of models allow us to estimate production frontier, the distance to the frontier, and the evolution of the distance to the frontier simultaneously. The results of our stochastic frontier models show that in most industries, 139 industries out of 173, the firms can diverge from the frontier. In other industries, we do not find any evidence for convergence or divergence. One of the possible explanation of the persistence of productivity distribution in Russia and the high gap between the production frontier and the rest of establishments may be the regional dispersion. We calculate average decile of all firms presented in one region, regardless of the industry. By doing so, we can compare regions with each other. We show that this average decile of labor productivity of regions positively correlates with gross regional product relative to the Russian average. We may conclude that almost in all studies concerning productivity growth and levels of productivity, beta convergence is found. It means that laggards grow faster than leaders. However, the gap between these groups remains wide. In Russia, we confirm these results and show that the catching up impulse is concentrated in a small group of young firms. That's why this impulse is not enough for all firms to converge to the frontier. We confirm that despite the beta convergence, the gap between the production frontier and the rest establishments is growing by means of stochastic frontier models. And we suppose that one of the reasons of wide gap between the production frontier and rest of establishments in Russia is a high regional dispersion. We can add that this high persistency of productivity distribution and wide gap between leaders and laggards is not unique for Russia. We do not know any estimates about the share of efficient firms in Russia compared to other countries, but we can find some evidence in literature that the key issue for the closing gap between leaders and laggards is opportunity for growth. In those countries where new firms have an opportunity to grow and to converge to large efficient firms, the overall productivity dynamics is more prosperous than in those countries where the new entrants do not have this opportunity and they stay for many years, small and not very efficient. There is so I can stop here. That's all for my presentation.
Анна, спасибо большое.
Thank you very much. We were joined by Mark Dehan, who will take the floor from me and who will be the moderator after my comment. So now I would like to make a few comments about the presentation.
Сейчас я переключусь. Да, вот. Thank you for the paper. The paper is great. Actually, we deal with the area where firms are different, they are heterogeneous, and definitely taking into account the focus in the literature on productivity on the firm level, the paper is quite relevant for what goes on now in the Russian economy. Taking into account time limitations, I will focus more on questions of the paper, and probably Anna will somehow clarify the issues. So I start from the fact that I was a little bit confused with the abstract, where in one sentence the authors say that they obtain results that low productivity firms grow faster than high productivity ones. At the same time, in the same abstract, we can read that this gap has increased, suggesting divergence in productivity levels. I think there is a confusion here with words. I think small firms have lower productivity. So if small firms have lower productivity levels or level, and small firms grow faster, why do we observe that the gap in productivity between low productive small firms and high productive large firms has increased? So some clarification is needed. Basically, another point is the following. Well, the authors report results. They say that the lack of convergence is because of basically two facts. The share of very efficient firms appears to be tiny, and the distribution of firms is highly persistent. At this point, I think, the most interesting issues appear, and I would enjoy to know a little bit more. Why do we observe that the share of very efficient firms to be tiny, a little bit tiny? What the authors think about that, and also about the distribution. Okay, this is persistent. Is it for all countries or only for some? Some comparative perspective might be interesting. So basically, is this persistency Russia-specific or international? How does the literature explains this persistency? Thank you. And now I'm going to give the floor to Mark Dehaan. I think he will continue. Thanks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I have to apologize for a delay, but I was kept busy by other things which needs a little bit attention. We are in the midst of a COVID crisis, and we are preparing ourselves for measuring the upcoming quarters in the Netherlands. And I can assure you that will be quite challenging. So at the end of this week, we will publish our first flash estimate of the first quarter. And well, this is not business as usual, I can assure you. Thanks for having me as the chair. I'm Mark Dehaan from Statistics Netherlands. I think there are 4 excellent papers in this session, and well, many of the topics are a little bit familiar as I have been involved in developing productivity accounts for the Netherlands. It's quite unfortunate that we were not able to have this session in one room together, but well, I think this will work out well too. So I think we have had the first paper. So the comments were given by Ilya. I'm not sure whether other participants are do want to raise any questions to the authors of this paper.
You can raise hands if you have questions. I think Mark will help you. Okay.
I don't see hands. If not, then thank you, Ilya, for your comments on this paper, and thank you for the authors for the presentation. Then we go to the second presentation, which is about intangible assets in Russia, and I think I have to pronounce this correctly. Ksenia Bobyleva will present this paper. Is that correct?
Thank you so much, Ksenia Bobyleva. Yes, you're quite right. Thank you so much.
I apologize.
It's okay. Thank you. Will I take my screen for everyone? This side. Well, good afternoon, dear colleagues. Today I'm pleased to present our first results of assessing the contribution of intangible assets to the growth of Russian economy at the industry level. During the past 2 decades, growth in the aggregate productivity has been quite unevenly distributed across the advanced countries. While earlier works explored the effect of differences in ICT investment and in multi-factor productivity, more recent one considers the role that investment in intangible assets play in explaining cross-country differences in economic growth. A smaller part of intangible investments, such as software, is included in standard national accounts data and in international data providers such as CLAMS project, but most assets such as R&D, brand equity, and organizational capital are to date not treated as investment in national accounts. Precisely speaking, R&D is to be added according to SNA 2008, but not all national systems account it yet. It can be said that intangible assets are inherently not only indicators but also drivers of innovative growth. According to current estimates, the share of intangible assets as growth factor in value added in a number of OECD countries amounted to 14% and 4%. And this diagram shows that labor productivity decomposition for business sector of 8 EU countries, which confirms the importance of intangible capital labor ratio in growth. Extended interpretation of intangibles proposed by Karada, Halton, and Sikkel, hereinafter referred as CHS, in 2005 5, it is popular for this kind of researches. This interpretation involves accounting for a number of intangibles that are not included in the classification of SNA 2008. For example, brand equity and company-specific resources such as including human capital. Accounting for additional assets is an extended interpretation, implies an appropriate revaluation of the flow of capital services, as well as adjusting the dynamics of output, taking into account the value added generated by additional assets. In our previous work, for the first time, CHS approach was taken for Russia in aggregated analysis. In expanded interpretation, the contribution of intangible assets amounted to 0.24 percentage point out of 12.92% average value added growth during 2004-2014. One of the important conclusions we came to is that the structure of investments in intangibles in Russia is significantly different from the OECD countries, in particular the United States. Russia has the largest share on investments related to the implementation of existing technologies in production and specific human capital demanded by a particular enterprise. At the same time, as you can see, in OECD countries, the most significant share of investment is in research and new development. You can find the high role of red line on these countries, US, Austria, UK, Finland, and so on. What is in additional to a common understanding of a source of economic growth, industry analysis is important for in-depth assessment of productivity and cause and effect relationships securing the economy. For the Russia, this problem considering intangible assets have not been previously discussed in the framework of growth accounting. In this research, we are the first who focus on industry-level analysis of the contribution of intangible assets in the growth of Russian economy. The comparison of industry structure of growth contribution of capital services related to intangibles in Russia and the OECD countries has been made too. Based on the results of our research, we also try to answer the question, what kind of intangibles drive each economic sector? And our key results, we find the contribution of intangibles to average value-added growth to be higher in market services than in manufacturing. It is the first difference from the OECD countries, where intangibles participate more evenly in services and manufacturing. The common between Russia and the OECD is that research and development are important in manufacturing, and intangibles not related to R&D are more important in the service sector. But in general, the role of research and development in Russia is much lower. As we already noted, the approach developed by Karada, Halton, and Sikkel is widely used for the evaluation of intangibles in growth. And in our work, we use the classification of intangibles close to that used in CHS approach. We use data from Russia claims, supply and use tables, Россtat official data, and collected available data for disaggregated analysis of intangibles by sectors of Russian economy. And we take period 2010-2016. I should say that we are largely limited by the availability of data. And in this table, you can see what intangibles we observed and what types we are taking. In our research, it's important to now to understand in which industries R&D plays a more important role and in which intangibles that are not related to R&D are. So while we use this classification, as you can see, we grouped intangibles that are already included in system of national account in one large group and call it basic intangible assets. It consists of investment in computerization, information, software, mineral resources, entertainment, and artistic originals. Separate, we observed research and development part and new product development. Well, when we are talking about new product development, we mean that this is costs in the financial services industries are not necessarily leading to a patent or copyright. And the fourth large group include new architectural and engineering design, advertising, marketing research, and the first part of organizational capital. What about industry groups? How you can see, the data set covers 34 industries grouped into 7 categories. For the period 2010-2016, we work in classification NACE 1.0. Well, going to our results. First, if we look at the structure of intangible investments by industries, it's strongly seen that market services is a leader in volume of investments in intangible assets, as in value-added share. It forms half of both indicators. The least amount of cost for intangibles is observed in agriculture. It's, as you can see, only 0.06% of all intangible expenditures. Here we should say that this situation with intangible investments in Russia quite similar with OECD countries. For example, as Karada and Toll mentioned in their paper of 2016, in period of 2000 and 2013, services account for 64% of market sector intangible investment in the USA and about 57 to 61% in the EU 14 countries. But if we look at composition of intangibles in GDP, in Russia here a big advantage towards investment in market service, even in OECD countries. Firstly, the share of expenditure of intangibles in GDP as a whole is larger. In European countries it's about 7% and in USA it's about 90%. Versus 4 and 8% in Russia. And secondly, costs are distributed more evenly between manufacturing and market services. Despite the negative growth rate of value added observed in the market services sector, the contribution of intangible assets to value added growth is the largest one, and it takes about 0.19 percentage points. Second place takes manufacturing with 0.03 percentage points of intangibles contribution to growth, and not far is construction with a contribution of 0.02 percentage points. This diagram also shows a total distribution of contribution of intangibles by industry in period of 2010-2016. And we can find negative trend in contribution of intangible assets in mining and non-market services, and the contribution close to zero in agriculture and utilities. For comparison, the contribution of intangible to labor productivity growth is similar in both manufacturing and services in the high growth economies. Austria, for example, Austria, Germany, Finland, France, Netherlands, and UK. It's interesting to note that if we look at the contribution of intangible assets by types in industry leaders, we can find that in market services, it was formed mostly by industrial design, advertising, and market research, and in manufacturing by R&D. So we can see this on this table. This conclusion corresponds to the situation in development countries. According to Rada, in developed countries such as Finland, Germany, Austria, research and development are important in manufacturing, and intangible assets not related to R&D are more important in the service sector. But of course, if we compare the contribution of research and development as a whole, in Russia it's much lower than developed countries, and this indicates the untapped capacity in this sphere of competence in Russia. Well, so there are key points that I wanted to talk about today, and I repeat, there are our very first results. I hope to share with you our future estimation. Thank you for attention, and be ready to answer clarifying questions with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ksenia, for your very interesting and concise presentation about the knowledge economy in Russia and how it can be compared to other countries. I think Mr. Tatarinov will raise a few questions, and then perhaps other colleagues can come in as well.
Well, I think I'd better just give my comments, which I prepared in English, and I think I'll just speak English, not to translate all the stuff I wrote on the paper. Just this kind of presentation. Okay. First, I want to say that I welcome the presented results of the undertaken analysis of the role of this specific group of assets in economic growth. However, there are several notes concerning the substance of the research, maybe not about the results of the research, but mostly about the contents of the assets which are dealt with. The paper deals with intangible assets, and we know that in 2008 SNA there's no such a specific group as intangible assets anymore. They are divided into two groups. They are presented in two groups of non-financial assets: intellectual property products, which are produced assets and considered as fixed assets. Also in Russia too, since the 1st of January of 2017, they are considered as fixed assets in the classification of fixed assets, official Russian classification. And second, non-produced assets presented by contracts, leases, and licenses, and purchased goodwill and marketing assets. They are not not considered as fixed assets, but usually included in companies' consolidated balance sheet, which is compiled according to the international financial reporting standards. And if you take the corporate accounting, so the intellectual property products are registered as fixed assets, and they are called intangibles. Well, goodwill is not considered certainly as a fixed asset, and it is recorded separately, but it is included into the consolidated balance sheet. From this point of view, it would be good, I think, just to clarify the contents of the asset group, which is determined as intangibles in the work, because now it may a little bit look like maybe a mixture of macroeconomic notions and corporate accounting terms. I think it's better to avoid this. Also, I have a very short, I would say brief comment on the application of these notions. If we consider all the intangibles, all produced, non-produced, and so all as a uniform group of assets in a production process, it may cause, from my point of view, too many methodological questions. First, if we take the group of non-produced assets within the SNA asset boundaries, which we indicated higher, in the production process, they are certainly not directly registered. And certainly measuring capital services in the case of these assets is only conditional, but we have just to work out these rules of how do we account for them. Recording of non-produced assets, which are not included in the SNA asset boundary, is a challenge from my point of view, especially when you use the statistics of production, which is based on SNA 2008. And also, I would like just to maybe to point a little, highlight some parts of the text, which there are several places in the text, I'm not talking about the presentation, which need clarification. For example, you say that brand equity is not included in SNA asset boundaries, but it is one kind of marketing asset. Also, it would be interesting just if you could explain a little bit more precisely what you mean under this phrase, adjusting the dynamics of output, taking into account the value added generated by additional assets. I certainly have several meanings of this phrase. Also, it would be good if two additional additions, which are added to the end of the presentation, you didn't show them. So, okay, if they could be a little bit more widely explained in the text of the paper, I think it would be a very valuable addition to the text. And at the end, I certainly would like to say that the work is done very big, and it's worth continuation from my point of view. It's very valuable in contribution to the analysis of production. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for your interesting comments from a national accounts and SNA expert, which is a plea for sticking to the definitions in the SNA. Are there other questions? And then perhaps Ksenia can briefly respond to the questions raised by Andrew and others.
So if there are no more questions, sorry.
Just one question. I have, well, your paper assumes that you worked a lot with the Russian statistics in this area, which is relatively new for our system of statistics. What problem of the evolution of intangible assets, sorry for this terminology, seems for you to be the most important in Russian statistics? What is your priority list? What would be the most important for you to improve your results? Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I have a question which is a little bit in an extension of that of Ilya, and it is that in the paper there is not that much discussion on mineral exploration, and that's, I think, a little bit remarkable for an economy which is so mining intensive. So perhaps you could, in this priority list of Ilya, also make a remark to or refer to the typical Russian economy and the importance of mining activity. Thank you.
Thank you. I should answer all questions right now or in the end of our session?
Up to you. Up to you.
Yeah, I think you can do it now.
Maybe I want to do it a little bit later. If
you want to think about it? Okay, then we come back to it at the end of the of the session. That's fine. Yes. Okay. If there are no further questions to Xenia, then thanks again for the presentation, and Andrew for your comments. And then we go to the third presentation, which is about, I think, structural decomposition analysis, right?
Yes.
It's the paper from Kuznia Muradova.
It's the same for me, so as you wish. I would like to congratulate everyone on the Victory Day, and I wish you all the prosperous going out of isolation. I'm happy to present my report today. The analysis of the impact of macroeconomic policy instruments on indicators of economic development of Uzbekistan based on the input-output tables and the social accounting metrics. You know, Uzbekistan has very important objectives now to improve sustainable economic growth, and amid these conditions, it's impossible not to speak about macroeconomic models. So the objective of our research was to construct a model instruments to analyze the forecasting policy to forecast the sustainable growth of a country in the middle and long term using input-output tables and the social accounting metrics. So we considered the model in this research. This is a static model. However, there is an input and output table. It's impossible without the use of social accounting metrics. So I would like to focus on the following. The research on the use of intersectoral balances and social accounting matrices. There's a lot of such kind of research. And first of all, I would like to speak about the Malaysian-American model. I would like to speak about the joint Malaysian-American model that includes the input-output table and economic blocks from the system of national accounts. This model is based on the input-output table, so we also constructed the Russian inter-industry model by the Russian Forecasting Institution. And another interesting thing here, based on the social accounting matrix, is the matrix of financial flows. That was well used in the year 1995 and 96 by the Center for Macroeconomic Analysis and Short-Term Forecasting. The author of this matrix was Andrei Belosov, who made very detailed research. And this research was the basis for the application of such metrics in Uzbekistan. I would also like to focus on the construction of the input-output tables for 16 main sectors of the economy in Georgia. We widely used the input-output tables and SAM metrics. India also is actively using those tools. You should see my screen right now.
основой построения таблицы затрат выпуск
The
является
basis for constructing the input-output table
таблица ресурса использования, подготовленная
is the table presented by Eurostat. So what's the uniqueness of such table? For the first time for Uzbekistan, they developed this input-output table, including 82 economic sectors, and it has a very detailed description.
ресурсов товаров и услуг и по таблицам
We
использования
use the table of commodities and services and the tables of use of such commodities and services. So what we have as a result of using this input-output table, it allows us to prepare different scenarios based on the assumption on the change in policy tools, which gives us a chance to identify an acceptable long-term development strategy of the economy. So among the opportunities, we should mention the modeling of a balanced development of economic development and economic growth. We studied this using the following example. In this table, we calculated that if we have a growth in output of energy and gas by 10%, the growth of the total output in general, considering all the multiplier effects, is 12 percentage points. So we can see a direct effect here, but we also have an indirect effect. The next example are the calculations of the change in consumer demand from the part of households by 10%, which increases the total output of industries. Here you can see the results. You see the total output increase by 5%. The growth of consumer demand has a significant influence on the output increase in agriculture, forestry, fishing, food products, beverage, tobacco products, chemicals, auto vehicles, which you can see from this table.
Конечно, вот здесь я хотела показать, помимо двух этих примеров.
Apart from these two examples, I would like to demonstrate the modeling of assessing the influence of investments on the economic growth. Modeling the assessment and the impact of changing policy instruments, and also modeling the assessment of changes in taxes on the output of industries and final demand. Here you can see the SAM matrix that includes the system of macroeconomic blocks. And on the basis of this input-output table, we are able to construct the SAM, which includes the system of interconnected macroeconomic blocks and the main identities of national accounts. So this is a system of linear econometric equations that describes the parameters of production and the use of GDP, changes in domestic prices, the formation of money supply, public finances, and indicators of development of the external and private sectors. Here we take into consideration the operations of interconnections between different economic agents. and their activities. On this slide, you can see a table saying that the basis for the SAM is the system of national accounts that covers the production account, the income generation, the primary and secondary distribution of income accounts. The table is based on the input-output table. And certainly, we need to have the expenses of households, the payment balances, so as well as national account statistics, and this allows us building the SAM. And when we constructed the SAM, we forecasted a number of indicators. On this slide, you can see the SAM, and we studied the scenario of growth in domestic investments by 10%. An increase in domestic investment results in the expansion of production and the provision of services. Therefore, total incomes and savings are increased. So the nominal and real GDP volumes will increase by 2.43 and 1.96 percentage points.
Следующая таблица.
The next scenario is the foreign direct investment growth by 10%. The inflow of foreign capital foreign direct investments gives us a more tangible effect compared with an increase in domestic investment, considering the ratio of the volumes of these exogenous variables to the total investment. As a result of real GDP growth, it will amount to 0.32 percentage points, with the nominal volume of GDP amounting to 0.42 percentage points relative to the basic version of economic development. The next scenario is the decrease in indirect taxes. In the table, you can see the results. So the reduced indirect tax rate by 10% had a significant positive effect, not only on an increase in income from wages, but income other than wages and private savings. The increase in the growth of real GDP by 0.11 percentage points. Here you can see the results of those calculations. I would like to focus on the following aspects. An attempt to construct different models in Uzbekistan was made a long time ago, starting from 1997, 1998. However, this research was stopped due to two main reasons. First of all, amid the administrative system, there was no demand in such models, or in some macroeconomic tools, the research of influence of those indicators on macroeconomic policy. But recently, Uzbekistan announced that it sticks to market reforms to provide sustainable economic growth. The second reason for non-development of modeling is weak information databases. To construct models, we need to have a very high quality information, including the information on the development of statistical database, meaning the system of national accounts, the input-output tables, the research of households. And today I would like to focus on this huge progress in the development of macroeconomic statistics in Uzbekistan. And this statistics is in public access. It can be used by researchers, and which opens opportunities for us. Therefore, in order to build dynamic models, we identify two groups of objectives: the improvement of the information database. We need to improve the methodology for the development of the input-output table, because this is the basis for many dynamic models. It's necessary to provide a coherent statistical data, and the statistics should have a wider coverage of different sectors. We need to observe the change in the deflators prices by sector. So this is a set of the required measures. Apart from the development of the information model, we also need to link this model to the objectives of our economy, so that they could help reflect the structure of different sectors, which are the advantage of Uzbekistan. We need to improve the structure of the model, its coefficients and equations. Consider the final demand. We need to improve the equation models and deepen the level of economic interpretation of the results. Uzbekistan certainly has an objective to develop and reach the sustainable development growth, to increase the number of low-income families, to increase the energy efficiency resources, improve the quality of services, and face some ecological issues, which requires a construction of such model instrument. So I would like to conclude with the following. As you know, at international conferences, when we speak about our research and our tables, I had to make reports, and there's an international global trade analysis project that considers where we consider those questions of the input-output tables. And lately we had a proposal to use the input-output table to develop the regional economy of Uzbekistan, to construct dynamic model of intersectoral analysis. We were contacted by some experts from the research center in Finland and the Australian Institute, the Center for Political Research, that is the main developer of dynamic models. So they proposed an initiative. Now we are having negotiations with the Ministry of Economy and Poverty Reduction in Uzbekistan and with the Russian Statistical Services to use the input-output tables for the construction of dynamic model. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Kuznia, for your interesting presentation of the SEM application in Uzbekistan. I think again, Andrew will make some comments on your presentation and paper, and perhaps others will come in as well with a few questions.
Thank you, Mark, but it's not my turn.
Oh, it's Ilya. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up things now. Okay, Ilya, I'm seeing waving. So
Okay.
Your mic, Ilya, your microphone.
Can you see my slides?
Excellent.
I think excellent, great. So I will be short. I start from the point that I'm not an expert in supply and use tables and this type of matrices, social accounting matrices. So my perspective is a little bit different. Actually, this is the session which is organized jointly by Higher School of Economics and the International Association for Research and Income and Wealth. And the spirit of this association is providing the platform for communication between economists and statisticians. So this is just a perspective of an economist. And basically, what I'm interested in is the story beyond this data. The paper addresses some macroeconomic policy issues. I would stress the point that I would highlight points about these macroeconomic policies and results the model suggests. Basically results are quite interesting, and I was impressed with the fact that detailed statistics on Uzbekistan is available. But the question is, what did surprise you with your results? What's new did you find with the model you suggested? Taking into account that you are an expert in Uzbekistan, you have some feeling of this economy, it would be nice to again highlight your priorities in your own understanding, in your own vision of the economy. So this is my first point. My second point is I'm more or less familiar with the literature on structural change. The model you deal with, it seems to be perfect to analyze this with this perspective. So I would appreciate some bridges between what you are talking about and also some structural models like the shift share analysis, for example. And last but not least is we are in the global world. We deal with the structure of the economy which differs from this basic framework like agriculture, manufacturing and services. For example, if we look at the paper which deals with developed economies and also with structural change in developed economies, we'll see that the role of services becomes much more important now, at least in the developed part of the world. The question is to what extent all these issues are applicable to Uzbekistan. That would be interesting, and actually the framework you use should suit for this. I'm impressed with the progress of in data construction in Uzbekistan, and I'm looking forward to know more about that. And probably you will be interested in dealing with some joint projects. To look at some global input-output tables which can be provided by projects like Wired, for example. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ilya, for your comments. You say you would be short, but your comments are quite,
Sorry.
We could discuss for them one full day, I think. But perhaps Kuznia could pick up just a few of them and respond to a few of the most important. For example, the policy relevance of the research you are undertaking.
You can speak Russian, no problem.
Yeah, I'm being translated. I have translation, so that's fine.
So the role of the service sector, I would really like to focus on it. I noted at the beginning that this is the first version of developing such tables, such input-output tables in compliance with the standards of the European Union. And as you know, they made a research of a large number of enterprises in Uzbekistan. And so they made a detailed research which increases the quality of the analysis itself. I would also like to mention that the constructed input-output table is connected with specific objectives. For example, we are discussing COVID-19. So what will happen with different economic sectors? What will be the economic losses? So such models answer to those questions. So what was new? What was like surprising to us? We prepared the basis to raise a question about developing dynamic models. This information database that we have right now, the payment balance statistics, the statistics of national accounts, this information will let us move to the construction of macroeconomic models. And of course, a very good question is related to the role of the service industry. In Uzbekistan, we have been fastly developing the banking sector, the tourist industry, hotel business. Therefore, the research on the role of certain services and their influence on the economics of Uzbekistan will be greatly appreciated. We were limited today with a 3-sectoral model, but we can also construct 8 or 9-sector model. We can break them down by specific sectors and services to have a specific results. Ilya also gave me a number of ideas, and in our further research, we'll definitely use them.
Thanks.
Especially related to the mentioned research. So we'll try our best to consider your recommendations. I really enjoyed doing this research. We have great opportunities ahead of us. And conducting this modeling research is a very costly thing. It demands huge financial resources to study the international experience, to recruit experts. So macroeconomic modeling is really great here.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Spasibo. Kuznia, thank you very much for your interesting presentation, and Ilya, thanks for your excellent comments. Last but not least, we are going to presentation 2, or the second presentation 2, which is from Dmitry Piontkovski, which is in fact a structural decomposition analysis on the structural changes in Russia. So Dmitry, please, the floor is yours.
Okay.
And we can extend the session a little bit, so take your time.
Okay, sure. Thank you for the invitation. It seems that it is better if I'll give a talk in Russian. So,
okay.
Just a minute. Okay, я буду говорить по-русски, поскольку
I will speak Russian because most of us today are Russian speaking.
Это совместная работа с
This is a joint work with Edward Baranov.
По справедливости, Эдуард Лаэтович возглавляет наш коллектив, но по техническим причинам он не сможет.
So due to some technical difficulties, they could not present, so I am going to be the presenter today.
Okay. Мы говорим о источниках
So today we are speaking about the sources
роста внутреннего
of
продукта в
domestic output
России в
growth in the
историческом
Russian
разрезе до
economy
2015 года. Сейчас
from
уже есть данные до
until
2017, но
2015.
мы
Today we
ограничились
also have the
15.
data of 2018, but we were limited in our research by the year 2015.
Большинство из вас, конечно, знает историю
Most of you are, of course,
изменения
well familiar with the history of
выпуска и основных
change in
факторов
the
выпуска за
output and
последние
production
20-30 лет.
factors over the last 20-30 years in our country.
Мы знаем, что с 90-го года
We know that
рост
starting from
ВВП в
1990,
среднем был около
there was a
0,7%.
GDP growth up to 0.7%.
Ежегодный рост. И этот период, он характеризовался
So this period was characterized
несколькими тенденциями,
by several
такими как
trends.
большие структурные изменения,
For instance, large structural changes
добывающей и
in extraction,
обрабатывающей промышленности,
manufacturing
и,
industries,
конечно, опережающий рост
and also
в
outstripping growth
услугах
in the
и
production of
другие.
services.
Давайте я пропущу стандартные
So I
слайды.
will skip those standard slides.
Условия торговли также менялись, в частности, либерализация
Trade
внешней
conditions
торговли
also
до
changed. We saw
примерно
liberalization of
2014
foreign
года,
policy until 2014.
а с 2014 года
Starting from
экономическая
2014,
политика
the
была
economic
направлена
policy
на
was aimed at
импортозамещение в ряде
import
секторов
substitution
экономики.
in a number of economic sectors.
Так, какие из этих факторов повлияли, в
So
какой
which factors
степени на
influenced and to which
экономический рост,
extent they influenced the economic growth
в какие периоды?
in these periods?
Давайте, прежде всего, на выпуск. Как получить какие-то количественные оценки
So how to have some
для
quantitative estimates
влияния тех или иных факторов?
of the influence of certain factors?
Надо заметить, конечно,
Here
что
we need
есть большое
to
количество работ,
mention that we used a lot
очень
of
большое, но в частности можно
papers.
сослаться на небольшую
We can
статью
refer to an article by Baranov and Bessonov speaking about the
И,
forecasting
конечно,
problems.
не могу перечислить все, поэтому
I will not list them all.
то, что ближе. Но, к сожалению, мы не видели количественных
Unfortunately,
оценок
we did not see any quantitative estimates
связанных
on the
с
influence of factors
межотраслевым взаимодействием.
connected with the intersector interaction.
Это неудивительно. Относительно недавно у
And
нас
it's not
появились
surprising
таблицы
because
затрат-выпуск,
we had this
достаточно точные и
input-output table
достоверные,
quite
чтобы
recently
на их основе можно было
to
такие
use
оценки
it as a
сделать.
basis for such estimations.
Наш метод – это классический метод,
Our
основан на
method
таблицах
is a
затрат и
classic
выпуск
method
с
based on the
времен
input-output tables
60-го года,
used
классическая
from the
работа Ченнери.
1960s,
Он
the Chenery paper
называется структурный
that is called
декомпозиционный
the
анализ,
structural decomposition analysis.
Исторически он основывался
So
на
historically,
симметричных
it was
таблицах
based
затрат и
on
выпуск,
symmetric input-output tables
который строил Леонтьев.
that was constructed by Leontiev.
Так, наша цель
Our objective
исследовать такого рода анализ
is
по влиянию
to
факторов
study
на
such
выпуск
analysis
по
on the
различным
influence of
отраслям
factor on the output by different sectors
в различные периоды.
in different periods of time.
Да, эти периоды, конечно, связаны
So
с
those periods
экономическими
are,
кризисами.
of course, connected with the
Поэтому мы
economic
должны
crisis.
разбить весь период с
That's why we need
90-го
to break
года
down
или
the
хотя бы
period
2003,
from the
когда мы
1990s to
надеемся
2003
получить более достоверную статистику на отдельные
by
промежутки,
different
в которых
segments
тенденции развития совершенно разные.
where we can see different development trends.
Okay. Какие таблицы есть в нашем распоряжении?
So which tables
Естественно,
we
есть,
used?
начиная с 2011 года,
Starting from
таблицы за 20
2011,
выпуск.
we have the
Современная методология
input-output tables,
предусматривает, что
and the modern
симметричные таблицы
methodology
строятся
assumes
на
that symmetric
основе
input-output tables are built on the basis of
supply and use tables, то есть
the supply and use
таблиц
tables.
использования ресурсов. Но есть также официально построенная Росстатом
But there is
таблица
also the
за
official
11 и
table by
16 год
Росстат for
симметричная.
2011-2015. It's a symmetric table.
Для проведения такого анализа нам нужны также
To carry
симметричные
out such an
таблицы
analysis,
за
we also need
12-15 год.
symmetric tables for
И
2012-2015.
модели достаточно несложные, линейные
The
модели,
models are quite
но
simple. There's a linear
для
models.
применения их есть некоторые дополнительные трудности.
However, there
Первое
is certain
это
challenges in
то, что
their
симметричные
application.
таблицы
First of all,
по
symmetric
сравнению с
tables
классической
compared
ситуацией
to the classical
несколько менее
situation
достоверны, поскольку они
are
строятся
less
на основе
trustworthy
современной
because
системы
they are
национальных
built
счетов,
on the
то есть на основе
national
таблиц затрат и
account
использования.
systems.
За
So
2011
based
год у
on the
нас есть
input-output
таблица
table.
официальная,
For 2011, we
за
have this
12 по
official table,
15
and
нам
from
приходится их
2012 to
строить
2015, we have to build
на
them
основе
ourselves
близкой модели, но, к
using
сожалению,
similar
не
models.
располагая той дополнительной
However,
информацией,
not
которая
having this additional information that could have helped us.
Вторая проблема состоит в том,
The
что нам,
second
естественно,
problem
нужны
is
таблицы в
that
сопоставимых
we
ценах.
need to have tables in comparable prices.
То есть нам нужны дополнительные усилия по построению
So we
дефляторов
need
по продуктам,
to build deflators by products,
не по видам деятельности,
not
как они
by
официально опубликованы.
activities as they are published officially.
Учитывая это, давайте я скажу о результатах. Во-первых, пока более-менее достоверные результаты у нас есть только начиная с
We have
2011
more or less
года.
trustworthy results only starting from 2011.
У нас есть различные периоды российской
We have
экономики.
different periods in
Активный
Russian
рост до
economy,
2008
active
года,
growth until
кризис
2008,
2008-2009
crisis
года,
of 2008-2009,
посткризисное восстановление и
post-crisis
далее
recovery,
кризис
and
2014-2015
decline in
года
2014-2015,
и рецессия до
followed by
современного
the
кризиса.
recession up to the present moment.
Соответственно, до 2003 года
Therefore, until
достаточно подробной,
2003,
точной статистикой, к сожалению, мы не
we do
располагаем.
not have
С
quite
2003
detailed
года
statistics.
мы надеемся ее
Starting
построить.
from
Пока у нас есть
2003, we are
только
hoping to
предварительные
construct it.
результаты,
We now have only preliminary
примерные
results,
качественные предварительные результаты
qualitative results, which are
для выступления
preliminary.
с перерывом на небольшой кризис. Ну, я могу кратко сказать, что,
So I can briefly
конечно, рост
comment.
внутреннего спроса
Growth in
и
internal demand
заметно
and
импортозамещение.
a significant import substitution.
Но давайте я не буду останавливаться на этих
So I will
результатах,
not
потому
dwell
что
on
они
those
пока
results
получены по не вполне достоверной статистике.
because we
Мы
did not
использовали
use
просто
quite a reliable
таблицы из
statistics.
проекта
We
BIOS,
just used
которые
the tables
построены на основе базовой таблицы 1995
based
года.
on the basic tables of the 1995.
Некоторые дефляторы, может быть, тоже вызывают вопросы.
So some
То есть тут мы
deflators may
готовы
be
только на какие-то
doubtful. Here we are
качественные
we will be
замечания.
ready to make only
Количественные
some
оценки,
qualitative
которые можно считать
comments.
относительно достоверными, это уже с 2011 года.
Estimates
Первый период с 2011
start
по
from
2014 года,
So the first
то есть
period from
посткризисное
2011 to
восстановление,
2014, which is the
тенденции достаточно
post-crisis
ясны для этого
recovery,
периода.
we can see quite clear trends here.
Ну, во-первых, заметно основным драйвером по
First of
всем
all, the main
основным драйвером роста являлся
the main
внутренний
growth
спрос.
driver is internal demand.
Какие-то, за исключением и внешний спрос по, конечно, сельскому хозяйству, связанным
in
отраслям,
agriculture and the related industries.
также по обрабатывающей промышленности.
Including manufacturing.
Но этот рост настораживает момент, что вклад накопления основного капитала скорее отрицательный. Вот мы
the
видим
gross
его.
fixed capital formation is negative.
Это делает рост относительно небольшим. И изменение
As a result,
технологий
we have an insignificant growth, and also a change in
заметно, то есть
technology.
изменения в коэффициентах матрицы Леонтьева
We can see the
в
changes
нашей
in
модели.
the
Это
coefficients,
заметно в добывающей
which is
промышленности,
visible in the
эффективный вклад.
extraction
Но
industry.
в сельском хозяйстве скорее
In
отрицательный. Но надо
agriculture, it's a
заметить, что
negative
рост в сельском
contribution.
хозяйстве в данных
However,
отраслях тоже
growth
относительно небольшой,
rate is
поэтому
also quite
хотя большие
insignificant in
отрицательные
agriculture.
проценты, но по факту в целом по экономике эта тенденция не очень. Отрицательная тенденция незаметна.
So we see, we don't see like very expressed negative trends.
Следующее, что мы сделали, немножко нестандартно для такого
So
рода
what we did
анализа.
then, something not really specific, not
Это
really usual for
анализ
such
на
kind of
протяжении
analysis.
одного года.
We made an analysis throughout 1 year, which was the year of the crisis.
По многим отраслям. Вот чем этот спад обусловлен и чем
And we saw a
компенсируется.
decline, so what it was accounted for and how it was
Обращает на себя
compensated for.
внимание определяющая роль
We
внутреннего
see a
спроса
determinant role of the internal demand
в этом спаде, особенно, как мы видим,
that
в
contributed
услугах
to this
и
decline,
в сельском
especially in the
хозяйстве,
service
но
industry and
также и
in
в основных
agriculture,
в обрабатывающей
but also in
промышленности. Добывающей
manufacturing
менее заметно.
industry.
Изменение условий внешней торговли
The change
в
in foreign
добывающей
trade conditions in
скомпенсированы
extractive
в какой-то
industries were
степени изменением
compensated
технологий,
for by the change in
изменением
technology
в влиянии технологий.
and the change in the influence of technology.
И частично скомпенсировано за счет изменения запасов.
And also partially compensated by the changes in inventories.
Вот использование таблиц затрат и выпуск, оно позволяет точнее оценить влияние, например, уменьшения спроса
the influence of decreasing demand, for example.
На падение выпуска. То есть мы видим, что минус 250% по услугам, частично это скомпенсировано изменением технологий, но влияние спроса здесь, влияние спроса более чем определяющее на этот спад.
Is very much determining here.
Фактор очень заметен. Хорошо. Таким образом, возможно, когда-нибудь мы сходным способом сможем исследовать нынешний кризис, когда у нас появятся более близкие к нашему времени таблицы затрат и выпуск, или хотя бы косвенные данные, по которым мы сможем их построить. Но, во всяком случае, урок состоит в том, что учет коэффициентов косвенных затрат позволяет точнее оценить влияние этих факторов.
Specifying the impact of these factors.
Это некоторые уроки, некоторые выводы из этой таблицы.
So these were some of the conclusions that we made following this table.
Давайте заметим нашими планами. Конечно, мы надеемся продолжить эту работу и, возможно, и после 2014-2016 года, это когда будут следующие таблицы. Ближайшие планы — это историческое исследование до и после кризиса 2008-2009 года. Сейчас в рамках проекта Russia Claims строятся более точные таблицы затрат и выпуск за период 2003 по 2010 года, и мы надеемся их использовать для исторического анализа влияния факторов спроса, изменения условий торговли, импортозамещения на выпуск и импорт в 2000-е годы в России. Спасибо за влияние, за ваше внимание.
Thank you, Dmitry, for this very nice presentation. And I think Andrew now will provide you with some comments. So Andrew, please, the floor is yours.
You're right. Actually, as far as we have, I think, ran out of schedule, I'll be very, very brief. Well, first of all, I would say that authors carried out a wide-scale research on Russian economic development for quite a long period. And certainly it's a challenge because of, first of all, very long time range, second, changes in technologies, industrial composition and scale of output, lack of reliable enough data for a certain period of time especially, and the external impacts which accompanied this period of Russian economic development all the time, crisis, 2008, 2009, and sanctions. So we know that input-output tables is a basic for economic construction of economic impact models, and certainly this research is based on these very different sources of data for this model, for this tool of analysis. Before 2011, they are based on the WIOD project data, which from my point of view are not reliable enough, especially for this kind of analysis, because we know that the first full survey of production costs for the purposes of input-output construction were carried out in Russia for the year 2011. And before, it was only one, which was done for 1995. And all that coefficients were used to, maybe they were modified and recalculated, but initially, basically, they used the same 1995 coefficients. So it's very, very vague, I think, basis. And the latter period is Rosstat data, especially, well, I mean, that basic tables of 2011 and later period, but we know that there are certain difficulties to to provide compatibility and comparability of results of these two periods of time. And this is the problem that which the authors of this research of the presentation managed to solve, I think, successfully. The other complicated task, which was also successfully solved by them, is recalculation of input-output tables at constant prices. We know what it was a very complicated task. I would not stop on this in my brief comments. And what I would like to say, I think it is necessary to draw your attention to the academic purity of the research, of the results. The authors didn't impute any, well, how to say, any features to this model, to the results of the model, which are not original for the research. They used only the analysis of the structure of production and the impact of different forces on these changes, on this structural change. Second, it's what we all feel in Rostat too, I would say, that it's the necessity to increase the development of input-output analytical complex for the Russian economy, and to make more detailed tables, I think, because we know an example of, for example, there's a lot of this kind of examples, but I like, for example, the US Bureau of Economic Analysis RIMS-2 analytical system, which can be used even for construction of regional matrices, quite reliable, which can be used for this to provide this kind of analysis in the US regions too, and sometimes very small regions. And I want to say that the detail level of source technological metrics also basically determines the ability to capture technological change in dynamic models too, and dynamic analysis. That is why maybe we have to increase the number of products and industries in our tables. And we know that we have just to pay attention to the unit used for the construction of the tables. But I want to congratulate the authors with this research, with the results, and to just wish them further success. Thank you very much.
Thanks for you.
Thank you, Andrei. Your plea for higher reliable data and more detail at the same time is perhaps, well, it's an endeavor. But perhaps Dimitri wants to very briefly comment on your suggestions. Dimitri.
Thank you for your suggestions and for your support. I think we will discuss how to provide the suggestion and to give more details and more statistical tools maybe based on this. Thank you. It would be nice to discuss this later, maybe
Sure.
with our co-authors.
Many thanks.
Excellent. Okay, I think there was one left over, a few questions that were raised in the previous paper for Xenia. I'm not sure if she wants to come back to the questions.
Yes, I'm ready to answer. You know, I tried to use this time not just for listening all these papers, but to add my presentation, and I hope it will help me to answer all questions and comments that I take. Well, first of all, thank you. I want to say thank you to Mr. Tatarinov for your comments, because I really waited for it. Talking about the first one, about non-production, non-financial assets, I should say that we didn't observe it, and there is three reasons of this. The first one, that they are not fixed capital, as you said. The second one is that in this research we try to take CARADA approach for Russia in order to make comparison with other countries at the same approach. So we take assets that CARADA use for other EU countries, and in this slide you can see more detail and explanation of what I mean talking about intangible assets. So it's three groups. Computerized information includes software and databases, innovative property. Here we can see R&D. And the third one, the most complicated one and the most discussion part. Here you can find brand equity. It is advertising and market researches and from specific resources. You know, this one of these types of assets we can evaluate in an understandable way. Talking about license and goodwill, I'm not sure yet about which part of investments I should take as a capitalization factor. So we should think about it in our, I suppose, next researches. So at the second part, I want to ask you a question about what I mean when I'm talking about adjusting the dynamics of output, taking into account the value added generated by additional assets. Here I mean that we make new calculation of GDP growth. So when we added new types of assets, we can't take the same official one. So we use some special framework. It's the last, it's the last one. The last line. So we make a revaluation of output, and here and taking into account new assets. And here I need to note that it's not necessary that new assets will increase the growth. If new assets will grow slow, it can reduce GDP growth. And to tell the truth, in the case of Russia, this is exactly what happened, but today I suppose it's not the main term of my speech, so I didn't plan to focus on these results. Well, and thank you so much for comments about including methodology. I will do this. And coming to the question of Ilya Borisovich, yeah, made this slide of our future researches. So I suppose the main question that I want to deal with in the nearest future is to find more accurate data of intangible investments to Russia. So maybe we will thinking about goodwill and license. I don't know. Especially I see that in Russia we have very small information and very slow value of an investment in computerized information. So maybe it's not so accurate. Maybe we need to find another source of this kind of investment. The second priority is to play with price indices for investment prices, because we in our research we take just one, and they are the same for all types of capital. Maybe maybe it will be better to play with this, and we will go to another results. And the second one is rate of economic depreciation. Well, we also follow Karada approach, and for all types of assets we took depreciation rate